Hello, this is Virtualis the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. The Ponziani-Steinitz Gambit is a risky but rather fun counterattack by black against the fried liver attack, and it still works relatively well all the way into the intermediate level, just like in these two following games. Let's go take a look. So this first game of the Ponziani-Steinitz Gambit is against a player rated 1500, or they would have been until they lost the game. And this game is kind of like the perfect Ponziani-Steinitz Gambit line. Now this of course begins with the Italian e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to c4. The Italian game, against we play the two knights defense, knight f6, and they start the fried liver attack with the knight forward to g5, attacking the f7 pawn, which of course would come with a double attack, a fork of the queen and rook, supported by the bishop. Now here, the Ponziani-Steinitz Gambit is the stunning knight captures pawn on e4, ignoring this threat. You will see that it's about +3. So white is good here. This is technically a bad move for black. However, woe be the player who continues with the fried liver attack. In this game, my opponent did. And you will see it drops all the way back to worse than equality. In fact, it's roughly about -0.5. And the reason for that is we've got the stunning queen to h4, and there is now a mate in one threat. Commonly, white will freak out. The most common move is queen to f3, a blunder, basically around -10. At higher depth, it's about -11, because now we have knight to d4, and the pressure is just overwhelming. There's a mate threat. Knight is attacking the queen, also attacking the pawn on c2, which of course comes with a absolute fork of the king and rook. Now in this game, my opponent tried to just stall the game and didn't make a move for almost 10 minutes. Don't do that. You know, it's completely unsporting. After 10 minutes, without any explanation or apology, they finally moved the queen back to d1, hanging mate in 1, good game, GG. Now let's now have a look at game 2 against a somewhat higher rated opponent, so rated in the almost 1600, and of course we start with the Italian, two knights defense, knight attack, Ponziani-Steinitz Gambit. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to c4, knight f6, knight forward to g5, knight captures pawn on e4, the beginning of the gambit. Now the critical move here is bishop captures the pawn on f7 rather than the knight. At the intermediate level, many players with the white pieces will know or understand that this is the best move, and of course my opponent did this in this game. After this move, white maintains their advantage, which is why it's the critical move. Black is forced to make a king move. There's no other option. But the important thing about the Ponziani-Steinitz Gambit in the intermediate level is that white now needs to know the second critical move, and often white won't. Have a look at this position. Can you find what white must do to maintain their advantage? Did you find it? The important critical second move is moving the pawn forward to d4, not the most obvious move. And if you don't do this, the advantage often goes back to black. In this game, my opponent decided to play a very natural move. Knight captures knight. You will see that it's a mistake, and the advantage is mostly lost. So white is still slightly ahead, but nothing like before. King captures the bishop, very expectedly. Queen now to f3 with check. Now in this position, I actually made a blunder. I couldn't remember where I was supposed to go, which of these squares. Eventually, I made the wrong choice. I played king to g8. e8, which is a straight up blunder. You can see the best move is moving king back to e8. Very important to just remember this. Why is that so bad? Look, +9, basically you lose a queen. How does that happen? Well, knight to g5. Now there is a mate in one threat against me. The only way I can defend against that is queen to e7. But now queen to d5 comes with check. I can only block with queen. Knight captures queen. Basically completely lost. I've lost the queen in the opening. King's in a weird place. Basically, it's the end. So this is what can happen when you move the king to g8. So don't do this. However, in this game, even though I made the mistake, white needs to find the correct move. And the thing with the Ponziani-Steinitz gambit is that it's reasonably easy to play with black, and you should really kind of learn how to play the gambit if you're going to play it anyway, while the moves are much less obvious for white. In this game, white played a very natural looking developing move, the pawn to d3, opening up the diagonal for the bishop, but you can see the evaluation not only goes back to equality, but now it's advantage black. So about -1.5 to -2. And the reason for that is I now have knight to d4, attacking the queen, attacking the pawn on c2. So same sort of tactic as before. Queen now has to go back to d1, and now I've got d5 with an attack on the knight, as you can see, about -1.5. And so somehow, despite the fact that white knew the first critical move, the fact that I made a huge blunder, I somehow entered the middle game with a good center, attacking my opponent's only developed piece, and a good evaluation, -1.4. It's, the Ponziani-Steinitz gambit is really quite good. Now for the rest of the game, it's not so interesting, I suppose. My opponent is rated quite a bit above me, 1600 to sort of 1400s, and they were able to calculate much faster. So eventually I pretty much just run out of time. Now how this game progressed, obviously that knight has to jump out of the way. I now try to develop. You will see here that Stockfish thinks that one of the best moves I need to do is to push forward the h-pawn, partly so that I can get that rook out in a sort of somewhat unorthodox development. However, I didn't quite see that. They short castles. I sort of asked to trade. I thought that was potentially okay because I'm developed while blocking in. So white's development. They developed their bishop, but I can push. Bishop goes back here. You can see Stockfish actually thinks undeveloping bishop is the best move. And that's partly because the d2 square is needed for white to develop their knight. Now, in the middle game, we both make inaccurate moves and mistakes, mostly staying equal. We sort of shuffle. Eventually, we trade queens, and you will see that capturing with the pawn would have been best, as I would have opened up the h-file, and I still have the dark square bishop placing pressure down the h-file. I didn't sort of recognize that tactic in the game, so I took back with the bishop, which was a mistake. See, back to straight equality. So more relative shuffling. We trade some pieces, but eventually I do capture an advantage when white makes a blunder here. So they didn't see that I controlled that diagonal, so blundered their rook, and so we enter an endgame of rook plus knight versus the rook pair. However, I wasn't able to really capitalize on this. And one of the things is the knight is pretty strong when there is still a lot of pawns left on the board. The knight can jump through lines, while the rooks are orthogonal moving pieces, meaning they can move sort of side to side, forward and back, and when there are so many pawns left on the board, they kind of get hemmed in. So as the game progressed in the end game, I knew I probably had an advantage, but I just couldn't break through. And all the while, I'm just hemorrhaging time. They've got 20 minutes left. I've got 5 minutes left here. I keep trying, and white just plays really well, I thought, with their knight. I just couldn't find a way to break through. 2.5 minutes left. And so eventually at this point, I thought, look, I'm just going to have to play conservative moves, which probably ends up being shuffling, and I have to be happy with a draw. Otherwise, I'll just flag. I'll lose based on time. So eventually, with 1.5 minutes to go, we end up with a threefold repetition when we draw. Because I am rated quite a bit less than my opponent, I do get a few points, but it's a little bit sad. What should I have done in this last move? The best move here was actually playing a6, because the knight can't actually capture that pawn, because if they capture that pawn, I now have rook a7, and effectively what happens, I can end up trading their knight for one of my rooks. Trading one of their rooks for my rooks, and so we end up with a rook and versus knight endgame, and that should be winning for me. Well, if I had enough time, that would be winning. So they can't actually do that, and so with this move, I'm actually, defended that pawn. I don't have to worry about that anymore, and then I can move both of my rooks into a battery on the h-file and then infiltrate this way. I didn't see that in the game. Probably wouldn't have won anyway with so little time. But anyway, good game. GG. My big takeaway from this game is that the Ponziani-Steinitz Gambit is a high-risk opening that is nonetheless still completely playable at the intermediate level. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.